Hey, gorgeous people. Happy Monday morning, August 11th. I don't know about you, but it is a really good day for Mercury to station direct for me. Coffee cheers to you and drink it and make eye contact. That is the headline of the show today. This has been a spicy little Mercury retrograde. We also have Jupiter and Venus conjoining one another in Cancer this week, and we have Saturn sextiling Uranus. We also have the moon moving all the way from Pisces to Gemini. So she's going to move through all of that and keep those air trines alive a little longer. We're going to get into all of that and more, but first I want to read some of my favorite comments from last week. Okay, Maria DeCintio 4532 says, I had to pause you and ask, is the banana tied to the plant? Sorry if that's covered later. Thanks for the vibrant references this week. So good. No, Maria, the banana is not tied to the plant. This banana actually has a very fun story associated with it that I actually feel like I might get in trouble if I share. But let's just say that this is a Broadway banana and it came to me through a series of circumstances that I'm not at liberty to discuss and leave it at that so I don't end up in prop house jail. And now my Broadway banana sits on the shelf behind me for good luck. Okay, Mitten Fist says, I feel like I have a really good relationship with my natal Mars, not as much with transiting Mars. Is that a thing? It is most definitely a thing. And what happens is that when Mars is transiting, so much else is at play. So, for example, if the first few times in your life Mars transited your natal sun, you were like, nothing going on. But then Uranus moves into a square with your sun. Now, every time Mars is transiting your natal sun, it's squaring Uranus. There's so much else going on when we take into account eclipses, retrogrades, outer planetary transits, not to mention things like progressions or solar return charts and things that are going on. So, definitely possible to have a mixed bag. And in fact, I'd say most people on Earth have a mixed bag relationship with Mars, where Mars sometimes is causing chaos and sometimes Mars is causing really awesome stuff. It's usually a combination of those two. It's actually just the severity of things that establishes the scale. So some people have really severe events happening with Mars, and some people have really, really positive things happening with Mars, although that one, pretty rare. Last and least, Tim Ages says, I stopped at video games. Bye bye. Bye bye. No, I'm just kidding. I'm actually a big video game hater. Everybody in my life teases me for it, but I loved the game Cyberpunk and I've played a few games here and there that really captured my heart. But really, what captured my heart was Tasha Griggs' comment below Tim Age's little comment. Tasha Griggs says, That's so sad. Just because she enjoys them and you can't relate doesn't mean the rest of what she says won't be profound. I have zero understanding of video games and I don't enjoy them, but I have a child who does. And imagine if I had walked away and said bye bye because I don't like video games. I would never have known the brilliance he has with music and never have learned how to be a better mom and human through him. And that is so freaking sweet. And that's what life is all about. So thanks so much, Tasha, for sharing that really sweet story about your son. Transits. Let's get into it. Today, August 11th, Mercury stations direct at 4 degrees of Leo. And we also have Saturn at 1 degree Aries, sextiling Uranus at 1 degree of Gemini. Tomorrow, on August 12th, we have Venus and Jupiter conjoining one another in Cancer. And this week, the moon will go from Pisces through Aries, through Taurus, through Gemini, and actually transit a lot of these planets and what's going on and keep that air trine alive a little longer. Speaking of air trines, we are kind of still in the middle of it. As we talked about on last week's show, these air trines are going to be alive and moving and sort of whipping through us like a wind from now until mid October with varying degrees of exactitude as Mars, then Mercury, then the Sun, and then Venus all move through Libra. So Mars has progressed a little bit out of the tightness of orb that we usually look for, which is about 3 degrees for traditional astrologers. Mars has moved out of that 3 degree range, but when the moon comes into Gemini, the moon actually has a wider range than the traditional planets. So the moon is going to be holding that air trine, and it really is going to be like a loose unfolding story this week. Now, the reason I wanted to start with that is because I actually saw a lot of astrologers last week talking about how last week was one of the most difficult weeks of the year astrologically. Now, I have nothing against astrologers having very different opinions from me. In fact, I think disagreement makes us all better in every way. but I am a Gemini sun, so I would think that. But it really had me thinking about the ways that sometimes social media can prioritize content that creates fear or creates these uncertain environments in our brains that cause us to linger on a post for longer than we should, or maybe we save it because we're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a horrible week. I want to remember this forever. And it's actually pretty interesting. I did not see last week as being the most difficult week of the year, not by a long shot personally, when I was looking at the year ahead, nor did I particularly experience the most difficult week of my year last week. One of the cool things about being a practicing astrologer is that I actually have a lot of really beautiful and talented practicing astrologer friends. And I was texting them a little bit about my week, not in the context of the air trines, but last week, because of all the reschedules and because of my booking software, Mercury retrograde, thank you for being over. I had 9 clients last week instead of 3. Usually I cap at 3 because it's pretty energetically demanding. And so even telling friends about that, like, oh my gosh, I am not really going to have a ton of time to do creative stuff this week because I have a lot of clients. They were like, what an awesome way to use your air trines. What a cool way to be busy. And it really had me reflecting on the ways that we let other people's language determine the subjective good or bad experience that we're having. And so that's something that I just wanted to share with you guys that I've been thinking about. And I've been actually trying to curate my astrological feed a little more intentionally with people who are leaving space for nuance and people who are offering both sides of what something might be and maybe even speaking to the spectrum. Now, that's my personal brand of astrology. I like to leave room for hope because I believe it's real and I've seen it so many times. But I also think that it's, of course, important to acknowledge that these symbols have the capacity to speak to truly hideous and evil and difficult human circumstances that we experience. But the reality is that for most people, most of the time, we are not experiencing the worst case scenario. And I'm going to avoid going deeper into that. I'm going to leave you guys with a dot, dot, dot right here because there are people on earth who are experiencing the worst case scenario. And so, because I'm reflecting on that, I'm reflecting that back to you guys and saying, you have a choice in who you follow and who you listen to and who speaks truth into your field of existence and awareness. And to some extent, your thoughts really construct your reality. And astrology at its best, I think, can help us situate ourselves in storylines around that reality. But I just wanted to say that astrology should never make you feel overtly anxious or terrified or scared to leave your house or worried about some kind of hideous outcome. Anyway, reflecting on these air trines, I wanted to show my math a little bit and talk a little bit about why I wasn't thinking of last week as one of the most difficult weeks. Now, we had Mars in a Venus ruled sign, Venus in a really good position, hosted by an exalted Jupiter in Cancer. That Mars was also co ruled by Saturn via exaltation, and Saturn was in Mars's sign. So that was actually sort of a condition of mixed dignity in my mind. That Mars in Libra felt so domesticated by that Venus moving into a conjunction with Jupiter, and the sun is in its domicile of Leo. Now, Mercury was retrograding through Leo, sure, but being hosted by a sun in domicile. In addition, there's so much synastry, trines, and sextiles, which are inherently positive and supportive aspects from all of the outer planets, including Saturn and Neptune and Pluto and Uranus. And Venus was squaring both Mars and Saturn in a sign based way across the cardinal signs. And I've seen time and again that squares or oppositions from benefics can actually be a really good thing. So if this week was really difficult for you, try to reflect on what kind of themes and topics were coming up for you and locate that either in a house in your chart, if you are familiar with the houses and you work with them, or try to locate it to a planet. So for example, if you had spiritual problems, you might look to the ninth house. You might also look to Jupiter. You might also look to your sun. If you had relationship problems, you might look to the seventh house or you might look to Venus. But there's so much else that's at play here. Maybe Uranus is on your natal sun or Pluto is opposing your natal moon. There's so much else at play. And I just wanted to de escalate a little bit of the rhetoric that said last week was the worst astrology of the year because of the Mars Saturn opposition. I just don't think that that's true. But let me know in the comments below if last week was the worst week of your year. I'm so curious. We can do a little investigating work and try to find out what was going on for you. Okay, that's enough preaching and proselytizing from me about the optimism of astrology and how useful astrology can be as a storytelling tool, not necessarily one of hard prediction. Let's talk about Mercury stationing direct at 4 degrees of Leo and why the fuck this Mercury retrograde was so intense and spicy for so many people. So the last full Mercury retrograde in Leo was in 2018. And last year we had a retrograde that took place partially in Leo, but the last retrograde that took place entirely in the sign of Leo was actually from July 26, 2018 through August 19th, 2018. Mercury went from 23 degrees of Leo to 11. And before that, 6 years prior, we had one in July 15th, 2012 through August 8th, 2012, from 12 to 1 degree of Leo. It's kind of important because Mercury will retrograde in the same triplicity for about a calendar year, meaning Mercury will retrograde in all three water signs and then move to the next element and retrograde in all three fire signs. And even though Mercury is stationed direct today, it is still slow, 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 standing almost still. So this is a really good time if the Mercury retrograde has taken you out, like so many people I know. If the Mercury retrograde has been chaotic for you, it's been a hard thinky time, or if you've had a lot of fun foibles and hijinks, definitely take some time to document what was going on here, or maybe even take the time to look back at those dates that I gave you from 2018, 2012, just see what was going on there. You'll also have several days to do this while Mercury starts speeding up and moving direct again, because Mercury will not exit that retrograde shadow period, the place where it retrograded, for some time. Now, today, Saturn is getting to the point where it is moving into the exact sextile with Uranus. And this is important because these slow moving outer planetary transits really take a number of years to build up and move off. So I don't think this transit is going to be connected with any particular kind of big event that's happening in your life today, but it will be a peak period in the story of Saturn and Uranus. Because Saturn retrogrades back into late Pisces, this sextile is going to form up again when Saturn stations direct and moves into Aries. I played for you guys a couple weeks ago this video that a sound artist has made of a creaky oak tree creaking and groaning and moving and lurching under the wind and the pressure of the world. And I feel like this is just such a good example of what's happening with the outer planets right now. And it's important to think about this in lieu of those air trines, because I want to bring up this concept to you guys of witness marks. So I actually first heard about this concept on the podcast S-Town, which is an old classic. It's a throwback, but it is a classic limited series podcast with a crazy, beautiful human interest story that takes you on a wild, wild goose chase. And one of the places that you trot through is the field of horology, which is the study of clockmaking and the repair and fixing and making of clocks and watches and timepieces. And in that field and in many other trades, there is this concept called witness marks, which is that when you, as a maker or as a repair person, enter into a clock's life, it's rarely at the beginning, and there's rarely any kind of owner's manual that you can look at to try to understand how to fix these pieces. And instead, what you have to do is peer inside that clock and look for the witness marks. You have to look for the tool marks and the maker's marks that the people who made that object or the people who have repaired it before you have made. And you have to try to reverse engineer an idea in your head of what they were doing and why they were doing it, and then how you can create work that complements it. And this concept of the witness marks is really how I feel about what's happening with these grand air trines. They're still playing out this week, and they're going to keep playing out through October. And when we look back at this period after Uranus moves out of Gemini and we think back about the outer planet synastry, I think we're going to see this time period right now that we're living in as being a major site of witness marks. I think we're really going to be looking for the witness marks of our own sort of evolution and growth and change right here in the heart of these grand air trines. The tinkering that you're doing right now is going to be an important symbol to future you of what you were thinking and what you were doing and what you were working on. So keep that in mind. All right, tomorrow we have a Venus-Jupiter conjunction that is playing out at 14 degrees of Cancer. And I think this is one of the sweetest transits all year. Jupiter is exalted. It is happy. It is loud. It is raucous. For some people, it is sacred rage. For some people, it is their life collapsing around them and a crisis of faith. And for some people, it's been random free money and everything in between that Jupiter has to offer. But Venus is coming in. And even if Jupiter isn't that great to you, and probably especially if Jupiter isn't that great to you, Venus is going to be sweetening the deal. And we talked about Venus and Cancer being baby, and Jupiter in Cancer is kind of like an angry, sacred god or goddess. This is a pretty interesting transit because I think some of the shadow side versions of this transit could be things like jealousy or maybe that sort of Zeus and Hera type relationship, which is sort of an explosive and argumentative dynamic with lots of big emotions. Now, that is one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum would be literally the sweetest, softest, most loving, domestic, and fabulous scene that you can imagine in your mind. I will say that these benefics have been playing games with my Cancer moon, playing games. On any given week, I eat about 0 grams of added sugar. I'm not into sweets and I'm really pretty careful with the things that I eat because I have a lot of food sensitivities. But with these benefics, first Jupiter and then Venus on my moon, I swear to you, I have eaten more muffins. And I don't know why it's muffins. I wish I could tell you why it's muffins. I have eaten more muffins in this transit season in the last 2 months than I have eaten in my life. Always been more of a bagel girl, but for some reason I am craving sugar and it's horrible. It gives me a headache, it gives me a stomach ache, but the benefics want me to have all of the sugar. Now, this transit is actually a pretty sweet one, I think, for any kind of like manifesting work or luck work, which we'll talk about in a minute, but I wanted to talk also about how the moon starts the week in Pisces, trining Venus and Jupiter. Then the moon swings through all the way to Gemini to keep those air trines alive. And then the moon is at the top of next week going to move into Cancer. And at some point, she will also, because of her range of engagement, be keeping this Venus Jupiter alive for way longer than it otherwise would have. So, this is a really sweet transit. Anything you want to do that feels soft and sweet and loving would be good. But Cancer isn't all just soft and sweet and loving and nurturing. Keep in mind that the crescent glyph of the moon has two very sharp points on it. And the iconography for the Cancer is, of course, the crab, which is not exactly a cuddly pet. And when we think about Cancer, we're often tempted to just reduce the sign of Cancer into the sign of femininity or the archetypal mother. But mothers are not a monolith, okay? And not all mothers are sweet, loving, nurturing mothers, not even Cancer moon mothers. So even if a sweet and loving summer isn't what you're having, this transit might be really good for you. There's a lot of power here to be used in whatever ways we want. And Venusian power isn't always softness. Sometimes it's cunning and sometimes it's social artistry. And Jupiterian power isn't always luck. Sometimes it is force and it is like a conduit for lightning and electricity. So I really think there's something in this transit for everyone and you can use it for whatever kind of energy you need right now, but don't miss this transit because I think it's one of the nicest of the year. All right, gorgeous people, we have reached the moment of the show where we talk about how I, as a pagan, animist, human, astrologer, lady here on earth, I'm going to be using the astrology of this week. And I wanted to talk to you about a few things. Now, the first thing is that Leo season is here, and the air trines were indeed a mixed bag. So it wasn't totally the best time to be doing manifestation stuff or luck stuff. Mercury was also retrograde in Leo, so that played a factor. But now Mercury is stationing direct, and we have this beautiful benefic conjunction. So I wanted to talk for a minute about the sign of Leo and what makes it good for that kind of like lucky manifestation. Well, ancient astrologers always associated the sun with divinity and fate and deities that existed outside this system of fortune here on earth, more so like the fated creator god archetypes. So when the sun is in its domicile of Leo or its exaltation of Aries, those are really good times to do solar stuff, one of which is manifesting. But there's also a lunar form of manifesting, which has more to do with circumstantial fortune here on earth. Now, this week is a really good time to try either of those things. And I'm going to show you some examples of different ways that I've done this. Now, I absolutely hate the word manifestation, but it is the word that we use. And so it's the word I'm going to be using here. Firstly, I'm going to show you this spiritual remote control that I made with Eliza Kelly's Constellation Club. Now, you can join the Constellation Club just for the month of August just to do this. She has all other kinds of cool events that she does that you might check out while you're there. This spiritual remote control I made on a whim last summer, and it has been a really fun and exciting little totem that I carry with me in my wallet. This is a lunar manifestation object. Here's why it has all this stuff on it. Everything I put on here was circumstantial, unexpected, and just kind of came about. I actually made it when I was traveling, so I didn't even have art supplies for my house or anything like that. I just picked up what I had laying around while I was traveling and tried to make it work. I also didn't put a ton of pressure on myself to make anything I put on here make sense, right? I have the words as images, and I have the word art, and I have B12. I put a lot of things on here just based on how I was feeling and how I wanted to feel. That makes this a lunar manifestation object. On the other hand, one of my favorite solar manifestation objects is this beautiful green glass dome that my partner gifted me. And inside here, I actually have specific little cards that I write specific things that I want out of my work, that I want to inspire me and that I want to accomplish. Now, that's more of a solar manifestation, and maybe you can hear the difference because one is something I'm just kind of feeling my way towards and hoping that the circumstances sweep me into like a wave. And the other really is a routinized solar list of things that I want to accomplish. It's more of an explicit, magnetized list. This is kind of the different spectrum that we're working with here. And this week, both are going to do well. But I really encourage you to think frankly about your own relationship to your sun or your moon astrologically. This is work that I do with clients astrologically, is like help them locate what kind of symbols and what kind of archetypes they can tap into to get more lucky or to work on their own manifestation. But situate yourself somewhere on the spectrum. Choose the solar thing, make a vision board, make a list, write yourself a letter in the future, or choose the lunar thing and find some way to totemize how you want to feel and just sort of vibrate your way in that direction and feel your way through the dark in that lunar way. Neither way is superior, and I have seen people have great success in both directions. I've also had success kind of mixing these methodologies, which I'll show you in this little jar that I made for myself. This is when I was at a point where I was really unhappy in my corporate career. And during a full moon in my Libra 10th house, I actually wrote down a list of all the ways that I wanted my job to make me feel. Now, writing down a list of things feels very solar to me, but writing down a list of the ways that I want to feel about my job instead of saying, I want this salary, I want this kind of work. I just was writing down how I wanted to feel. So that part of it, I think, is very lunar. I actually read this the other day and it was really sweet. You guys make me feel really good. I did get my dream career. Here I am. Now, on that sweet note, I'm going to be using this week to do something that is manifesty. Don't really know what yet, but I'll share it on my Instagram. And I wanted to share a little story about sun stuff that I think is kind of funny, which is that I work with Apollo quite a lot. And one of my favorite resources is this website, theoi.com, which is just an amazing, historically accurate resource for people who are sort of reconstructionists like I am. I like to know what people called Apollo back in the day, and I use those epithets and kennings for my deities. Now, Apollo has all of these epithets about being an averter of evil, and some of them kind of verge into the rhetoric of purity and burning away impurity. And it's interesting because in a couple years of working with him, I never really felt that side of him. I really didn't. Because I work with him more in an artistic and a divinational capacity, I really wasn't getting that. Now, the summer I started thinking about this in 2023, it actually turned out to be the hottest summer on record, I believe, ever in San Antonio. We had 100 straight days of the temperature being over 100 degrees. And I was pregnant and it was horrible. And I could end the story right there. But I will just say that if you are getting out of your car in, say, a Target parking lot and you are walking the 100 yards to the front door of Target and you are pregnant and it is 110 degrees, you will figure out really quickly how the sun's power can avert your impure motivations. You are not outside for any old reason. You are outside when you absolutely freaking need to be. And I also really felt like that concentrated power of the sun, as it might be used as a tool to vanquish evil, not just in brightness, but in the heat and in the presence and the weight of the sun's light. So, those are things that I would encourage you to think about while we're in Blessed Leo season. This would be a good week to do some research on theoi.com or connect with some solar deities or just go outside and connect with the sun and get the sunlight in your bones. Last things last, that Venus, Jupiter, and Cancer, very good relational dynamic vibes for particularly families, friends, loved ones. So make sure that you tell somebody you love them this week. Maybe even better, send them this video. All right, beautiful people, you know what that sound means. My coffee is pretty much gone, so the show is pretty much over. Let me know in the comments if you think you're more solar or more lunar. I can weigh in for you based on your chart. I hope you guys have an awesome week, and I will see you next Monday.